Oh, you want to play psycho killer? Can I be the helpless victim?
Cross your eyes and scream, man! Scream for your life!
Welcome. I'm your Scream Queen, Jenica Olin. This is my 10th episode. My objective for this podcast is to delve into the themes of horror, both real and imagined. Each episode will cover one movie in depth based on a theme of the month. I'm starting the year off with the theme, Be Careful What You Wish For. A quick layout of this podcast. Each episode will have an intro, brief synopsis of the movie, analysis of the film, and then I get into the true crime of it all. I am a huge true crime fan, and I like to make connections between the true horrors that inspire our darkest imaginations. The truth is, the stuff on screen is way tamer than the true horrors that take place every day. I've been given feedback about my podcast, and I'm trying my best to improve the formatting and length on certain parts. From now on, all the personal stuff is going to be left at the back end. And in the beginning, I will be sharing a few trivia facts I find relevant before getting into my storytelling abilities. Also, spoilers. If you are listening to my episodes, you are here because you have seen the movie and you're interested in learning more about it, or you like to learn about horror cinema, but maybe you don't have the stomach to actually watch it on screen. If you don't fall into either of those categories, you should probably stop listening now. Either way, I've made it my job to spoil the shit out of this movie. In today's episode, I will be covering Pan's Labyrinth, directed and written by Guillermo del Toro, starring Ivana Baquero, Ariadna Gil, and Sergio Lopez. You've probably guessed that Pan's Labyrinth had a large budget with all the beautiful details, CGI, and practical effects. This movie had it all. The estimated budget was $19 million, and it grossed $83 million worldwide. This movie is a longer one at 1 hour and 58 minutes, but it's well worth your time. Stephen King attended a screening of the film and sat next to Guillermo del Toro. According to del Toro, King squirmed when the pale man chased Ophelia. Del Toro compared the experience of seeing King's reaction to winning an Oscar, which he eventually did, with The Shape of Water. Proposed as the middle film in a trilogy about the Spanish Civil War, this would make The Devil's Backbone the first film in the series. As of 2016, Del Toro has no immediate plans to start work on a third film. The film is spoken in Spanish, and thankfully, there is no version where it is dubbed in English, not that I saw anyway. And if you ask me, that would take away from the experience. Del Toro wrote the English subtitles himself. He no longer trusts translators after problems with previous subtitled movies. I would like to personally thank Del Toro for doing this, as it's important for the integrity of the message he is sending. The film received 22 minutes of applause at the Cannes Film Festival. That's a long time to be applauding. It was well deserved. I can't imagine the scene of people just standing and applauding for a straight 22 minutes. 22 minutes. Now it's time. Let's set the scene with a synopsis of the movie.
In a dark time, when hope was bleak, there lived a young girl whose only escape was in a legend that wanted her back.
In a fairy tale, Princess Moana, whose father is king of the underworld, visits the human world, where the sunlight blinds her and erases her memory. She becomes mortal and eventually dies. The king believes that eventually her spirit will return to the underworld, so he builds labyrinths, which act as portals around the world in preparation for her return. In 1944, Francoist Spain, 10-year-old Ophelia travels with her pregnant but sickly mother, Carmen, to meet Captain Vidal, her new stepfather. Vidal, the son of a famed commander who died in Morocco, believes strongly in phalangism and has been assigned to hunt down Republican rebels. A large stick insect, which Ophelia believes to be a fairy, leads Ophelia into an ancient stone labyrinth. But she is stopped by Vidal's housekeeper, Mercedes, who is secretly supporting her brother Pedro and other rebels. Mercedes has access to Vidal's strategy against the rebels and passes crucial information to them, which allows the rebels to stay one step ahead of Vidal's plans to hunt them down. That night, the insect appears in Ophelia's bedroom, where it transforms into a fairy and leads her through the labyrinth. There, she meets a faun who believes she is the reincarnation of Princess Moana. He gives her a book and tells her she will find in it 3 tasks to complete in order for her to acquire immortality and return to her kingdom. Ophelia completes the first task, retrieving a key from the belly of a giant toad.
Hola, soy la princesa Moana.
But becomes worried about her mother, whose condition is worsening. The faun gives Ophelia a mandrake root, instructing her to keep it under Carmen's bed in a bowl of milk and regularly supply it with blood, which seems to ease Carmen's illness. Accompanied by the fairy guides and equipped with a piece of magic chalk, Ophelia then completes the second task, retrieving a dagger from the lair of a pale man, a man-eating monster. Although warned not to consume anything there, she eats 2 grapes, awakening the pale man. He devours 2 of the fairies and chases Ophelia, but she manages to escape. Infuriated at her disobedience, the faun refuses to give Ophelia the 3rd task. During this time, Ophelia becomes aware of Vidal's ruthlessness in the course of hunting down the rebels. After he murders 2 local farmers detained on false suspicion of aiding the rebels, Vidal interrogates and tortures a captive rebel. He asks Dr. Ferriero to tend to the captive, whom Ferriero then euthanizes at the rebels' own urging. Realizing that Ferriero is a rebel collaborator, Vidal kills him. Vidal later catches Ophelia tending to the mandrake root, which he considers delusional. Carmen agrees and throws the root into the fire. she immediately develops painful contractions and dies, giving birth to Vidal's son. Mercedes, having been discovered to be a spy, tries to escape with Ophelia, but they are caught. Ophelia is locked in her bedroom while Mercedes is taken to be interrogated and tortured. Mercedes frees herself and stabs Vidal non-lethally in her escape to rejoin the rebels. The Faun, having changed his mind about giving Ophelia a chance to perform the third task, returns and tells her to bring her newborn brother into the labyrinth to complete it. Ophelia successfully retrieves the baby and flees into the labyrinth. Vidal pursues her as the rebels launch an attack on the outpost. Ophelia meets the Faun at the center of the labyrinth. The Faun suggests drawing a small amount of the baby's blood, as completing the third task and opening the portal to the underworld requires the blood of an innocent. But Ophelia refuses to harm her brother. Vidal finds her talking to the Faun, whom he cannot see. The Faun leaves, and Vidal takes the baby from Ophelia's arms before shooting her. Vidal returns to the labyrinth's entrance, where he is surrounded by rebels, including Mercedes and Pedro. Knowing that he will be killed, he hands the baby to Mercedes, asking that his son be told about him. Mercedes replies that his son will not even know his name. Pedro then shoots Vidal dead. Mercedes enters the labyrinth and comforts motionless, dying Ophelia. Drops of Ophelia's blood fall down the center of the spiral stone staircase onto an altar. Ophelia, well dressed and uninjured, then appears in a golden throne room. The king of the underworld tells her that by choosing to spill her own blood rather than that of another, she passed the final test. The Faun praises Ophelia for her choice, addressing her once more as Your Highness. The queen of the underworld, her mother, invites Ophelia to sit next to her father and rule at his side. Back in the stone labyrinth, Ophelia smiles as she dies in Mercedes' arms. The epilogue completes the tale of Princess Moana, stating that she returned to the underworld, ruling wisely for many centuries, and left quiet traces of her time in the human realm, visible only to those who know where to look. Now it's time for the true crime of it all. I decided to change the format of this episode a little bit because my true crime portion is going to focus on the horrors of the Spanish Civil War that took place from 1936 to 1939. The history of this war is going to be key in our understanding of the characters and their motivation. There are many terms I wasn't familiar with in this film, so I figured some of my listeners may be wondering what phalangism is and what its place is in the Spanish Civil War. Phalangism emphasizes the need for total authority, hierarchy, and order in society. Like fascism, Phalangism is anti-communist, anti-democratic, and anti-liberal. The opposing side are the Republicans, because the term Republican has a very different meaning depending on the time in which you are referring to the political movement or the political party. I want to be clear on what a Republican was during the Spanish Civil War. Republican, as it's being referred to in this context, is a faction that follows left-leaning ideology, including far left, communist, and anarchist groups. They received support from the Soviet Union. They are basically the Democratic Party of today that would have also been considered the Republican Party during this time in American history. Words change, meanings change. Keep up with the times, people. I feel like most of my listeners are smart enough to know the difference between a Republican in the 1930s and a Republican now, but it has to be said because you never know. So why did the Spanish Civil War start? This is going to sound really familiar, you guys. The reason why the Spanish Civil War started was because Spain spent much of the 1920s under the dictatorship of Miguel Primo de Rivera. And the economic hardships caused by the Great Depression intensified polarization between the Spanish public, and then the labor unrest was widespread in the early 1930s, and the election of February 16th, 1936 brought to power a leftist Popular Front government. So another term that I was like, what is a Popular Front government? Well, I'm here to tell you. A Popular Front government refers to a coalition of working class and middle class parties united for the defense of the democratic forms against a presumed fascist assault. I'm pretty sure we know what a fascist is. He has orange skin, his hair is in a swoop. If it walks like a fascist, it talks like a fascist, looks like a fascist, well, it's probably a fascist. Fascist and the extreme right forces responded in July 1936 with an army mutiny and coup attempt that expanded into a civil war. Again. So they had an army mutiny and coup attempt that then expanded to the Civil War. So these are the fascists that did that. They had a coup attempt. So does that sound familiar? Like a January 6th kind of familiar? I don't know. All right, back to it. Del Toro's Pan's Labyrinth 2006 is set in 1944, 5 years after Franco's victory in Spain's victorious Civil War. Vidal is a Francoist who ruthlessly hunts down remnants of the Republican forces who survived the Civil War and now wage a guerrilla war against the regime. The entire film is set in the outpost's surroundings, which act as a microcosm of the wider situation in Spain, with a strongman leader, pockets of resistance, and civilians living under a dictatorship. In the movie, by defeating Vidal and his forces, the heroes of the film restore justice to Spain. In reality, there was no such fantastical outcome, and the debate on Spain's past raged on even as Pan's Labyrinth was released. So this is a highly debated topic even today. In reality, after the Civil War ended, Republican refugees and their families fled to France, mainly by foot. This exile of nearly 500,000 people was called the Retirada. In France, they were kept in unsanitary refugee camps in the south, before settling and making their lives as best as they could. This created both economic and political problems for the French government, which was immediately eager to sponsor either repatriation, which is the returning of someone to their own country, a further immigration to Mexico, Chile, and the Dominican Republic, the only 3 American countries willing to officially welcome the Spanish Republicans. Military tribunals were set up to try those who remained. These tribunals sent thousands more Spaniards to their death. And Franco himself admitted in the mid-1940s that he had 26,000 political prisoners under lock and key. So we're going to get into like the main characters, the main villains of this story. So I really want to paint a picture of like these guys and what their history is and how they got where they were in taking over in this mutiny. What was their role? Francisco Franco is considered the main antagonist, leading the nationalist forces and eventually establishing a brutal dictatorship in Spain after the war. As a young army officer, Franco was sent to fight a colonial war in Morocco, where he learned the brutal styles of warfare that would mark his career. At 33, Franco was the youngest general in all of Europe. During the Civil War, he built his image as a military leader. Before long, he was named Generalissimo, a general among generals. The fact that his regime was called Francoism is a huge red flag. This guy is the bad guy. Anytime you have a whole movement named after you, so it's not his name's Franco, it's called Francoism, you are creating an entire narrative just around you. That is some egomania bullshit. So, with fascists and fascism always in fashion with their flags, I was like, I wonder if Franco has a flag. And guess what? He did. He does. He did. He's dead now. So that flag is not flying anymore. But when I looked it up, I got to see that his flag was known as a guidon. I think I said that right. Which was essentially a military standard representing the head of state during his regime. This flag featured the eagle of St. John, heraldic symbol, and was used in 1940 until his death in 1975. While there are campaign flags on both Biden and Trump, for both Biden and Trump, I'm not going to pretend like Biden doesn't have flags. People have flags for Biden too. The way in which the flags are being used are extremely different. The Trump flag is used in a way that far surpasses the boundaries of a campaign, and it's really disturbing to say the least. Now for his henchmen, because every great fascist has some goons, right? They've got to have their goons. So we've got Emilio Mola, was chief planner and director of the 1936 coup. As a significant figure in the early stages of the war, he was in a position of power as Director General of Security in 1930. Then we've got Gonzalo Cuepo Delano, known for his violent rhetoric and propaganda during the conflict. Cuepo Delano's regular broadcasts and interviews were a key feature of the nationalist communications, often drinking alcohol despite serious liver damage. He encouraged brutality, for example, announcing to troops, "I authorize you to kill like a dog anyone who dares oppose you." He made up events avidly as he spoke. Corpses were publicly displayed to terrorize. Body parts were frequently cut off, following a grim tradition from Spanish Morocco. Back in 1947, Franco had declared that a king would succeed him. And in 1969, he handpicked Prince Juan Carlos, the grandson of King Alfonso XIII, for the role. Though Juan Carlos had spent a good deal of time alongside Franco and publicly supported the regime, he pressed for change immediately upon taking the throne. Good job, Juan Carlos. This included the legalization of political parties. The first post-Franco elections were held in June 1977. And except for an 18-hour-long coup attempt in 1981, Spain has remained democratic ever since. An interesting fact about the opening sequence of the movie: the ruined town shown is Del Chait, Zaragoza, in Aragon, Spain. The town was destroyed during the Spanish Civil War and never rebuilt. Now it's time to talk horror and examine the themes of this film. I really enjoy having guests on, but I can't always track someone down in time to record an episode and keep up with the one episode a week. Having a permanent co-host would really be nice in this aspect, but I also don't have anyone necessarily that I can be like, hey, you want to commit to this every single week with me? For this episode, I am solo. Now it's time to talk horror and examine the themes of this film. So we've got fantasy versus reality. The film shifts between the real world of post-Civil War Spain and a magical realm, blurring the lines between the two. Vidal's intrusion on Ophelia's home life has threatened her sense of security. This causes her to turn inward and embarks on an epic journey of her own to escape this reality. On her first night in her new home, a strange insect she believes to be a fairy leads her to an ancient labyrinth where a faun tells her she is a princess who must complete 3 tasks to return to her kingdom. The faun produces a book which details the tasks. This is every little girl's fantasy, especially when you're in such a devastating situation. So Ophelia's father died. She's got all these horrible things happening around her. There's guerrilla warfare going on. Her mom's pregnant but sick. And now she's being told she has to call this new guy her dad, Vidal her dad, which she refuses to do. Good girl. Who wouldn't want to be a princess, have this fairy tale of this isn't reality, this isn't where you're meant to be. You're meant to be a princess. Nothing more appealing to a 10-year-old girl than that. With the film, we've got the cinematography is part of the storytelling. During the real world, we have low-key lighting. And then during the fantasy world scenes, we have high-key lighting. And this creates an immersive experience. The set design, when Ophelia is the prominent character in a scene, the design is circular to emphasize her embracing the fantasy world. The real world scenes have a much more straight, angular design to them. So this is all very purposeful to make that distinction between the real world and the fantasy world. So Javier Navarrete's score is structured around a lullaby, which plays into the fantasy aspect of the movie and the fact that our heroine is a child, or at least one of our heroines is a child. Our second theme in this movie is war and rebellion. The film explores the themes of war and rebellion through this struggle between fascist troops and the rebels. Pretty obvious. This is the reason why I did a shorthand version of the Spanish Civil War, so we can better understand the political climate in Spain at this time. Vidal is a brutal fascist that kills without remorse. The scene that got me the most is when he brutally beats in the face of the father-son duo that are just hunting for rabbits because they are being interrogated because the soldiers believe that they are helping the Republicans. But Vidal looks a little bit closer. He finds evidence that what they were saying was actually the truth. There was a dead rabbit in their bag. So he just killed these two men for no reason. And he does not have an ounce of remorse in him. He just looks at his men and he says, "This is why you shouldn't call me out until you have investigated." You can see like the look on the men's faces. They are distraught about the fact that these innocent men have been murdered. At that point, he just wants to punish them for even taking up his time. He's such a hot-headed asshole. The next theme I have is the importance of standing against fascism. Ophelia's tasks parallel what's happening in the real world when she's in her fantasy realm and she's trying to complete these tasks. So, for example, Ophelia's first task is to retrieve a key from the belly of a giant toad, which has made its nest inside a huge fig tree. Ophelia crawls inside the tree to confront the creature. The toad is described as parasitic, stopping the tree from thriving and causing it to slowly die. Despite attempts to intimidate her, she defeats the toad using stones given to her by the faun. So that is her standing against fascism. The scene is juxtaposed with Captain Vidal and his men investigating the remains of a recently abandoned rebel camp. He taunts them with items they left behind before returning to his base. The real world echoes the fantasy here. Just as the toad has poisoned the tree, the forces of Francoism have turned a democracy into a fascist state, forcing the innocent into either subservience or resistance. Similarly, but not the same, we have the theme of disobedience. The film explores the idea that disobedience can be a virtue, and the price and rewards of disobeying oppressive authority figures. The scene where Ophelia eats the grapes is enraging as a viewer. You just want to go into the screen and shake her. But as angry as that scene makes me, and I'm just like, why for 2 grapes? He eats children, but she eats those 2 grapes with a purpose. Okay, so there was a reason why Del Toro put that in there. These types of actions, her disobedience, turns out to be a virtue in the end. The second task provides the film's most iconic image. Ophelia enters a magical door from her room into an otherworldly chamber decorated with frescoes of a tall, naked, and eyeless figure slaughtering children. The pale man is the creature depicted in the images, sits in the center of the chamber, motionless and horrific in front of a sumptuous feast laid out on a dinner table. Ophelia was warned by the faun not to touch a single morsel. The faun has provided her with 3 fairies who guide her to open a locked door at the back of the room, using a key from the first task. She retrieves the dagger from inside the box, but on the way back to the real world, hunger gets the better of her and she eats 2 grapes. This causes the pale man to awaken and proceeds to violently devour 2 of the fairies. He almost does the same to Ophelia as she escapes. The pale man represents more than just the violence of Franco's regime. He hoards food and forbids others from eating. Similarly, the film's representation of Franco, Captain Vidal, keeps a locked stockpile of food and medical supplies at his base. Del Toro represents Spain's dictator as a parasitic figure, using starvation as a manipulative tool against the defeated side in the Civil War. At the same time, Franco consolidated his regime by building a base of supporters who managed access to necessities which were in short supply. Mercedes and Ferriero smuggle medicine and a few luxuries to the rebels. In a scene before the second task, local people queue to receive meager portions. This was an attempt to stop them from passing food on to the resistance. Whilst the villagers wait in line, one of the captain's men announces that this is your daily bread in Franco's Spain. According to Del Toro, the theme of courageous disobedience is why the movie is set against the backdrop of Falangist Spain, where disobeying the fascist regime was dangerous. The final test of character for the princess confirms the importance of disobedience as well. When she spills her own blood instead of the blood of her innocent baby brother, she is rewarded by going back to the underworld where she belonged. Another theme is femininity. The film features a group of female characters who struggle to survive in a world controlled by men. It's clear that Vidal only cares about the survival of his unborn son. When the doctor tells him she's not doing well, he tells the doctor to save the baby as his top priority. And he does this where Ophelia can hear him. In this world, women are vessels for men to create more men. Mercedes is the other heroine in our story, and her journey parallels Ophelia's, as she has her own tasks to help defeat the fascists on the inside. She is able to move under Vidal's thumb because he wouldn't pay much attention to her and doesn't think much of women when it comes to an uprising. Sadly, Ophelia's mother, Carmen, dies giving birth to Vidal's son, and he doesn't even mourn a day for her. Even though Ophelia is just a child, she knows her safety is not guaranteed now that her mother is gone. And she's already been treated poorly by her stepfather, Vidal. So next, I've got the theme of life and death. The film explores themes of life and death, including the death of an immortal princess who enters the mortal world. It is alluded that her father suffered the fate of the Republican soldiers when Ophelia says, "My dad was a traitor." There is a trading of innocence for the external life of another. Instead of sacrificing her baby brother, though, Ophelia makes the ultimate sacrifice and dies for what she believes in. The ending of the movie shows Ophelia being shot by her stepfather and left for dead. Guillermo del Toro has said, "I always think of that beautiful quote by Soren Kierkegaard that says, 'The tyrant's reign ends with his death, but the martyr's reign starts with his death.' I think that in the essence of the movie, it's about living forever by choosing how you die." Quickly, I've got some interesting facts. In an interview, Guillermo del Toro hinted that the nameless soldiers who died in the woods, including the one shot through the hand by Vidal, are the surviving children of the orphanage in The Devil's Backbone that he was the director of in 2001. This confirms the idea that most of Del Toro's films happen in the same universe. Del Toro indicates that the film is quilted with a pattern of threes. He mentions that this was intentionally done as to invoke a greater sense of fairy tales and mythological traditions, both of which typically feature a hero or heroine existing among threes. For instance, the 3 tasks that Ophelia has to complete. Let's end on a high note. If you would like to collaborate on something, I would love the opportunity to connect with more people in the horror scene. I'm also thinking about making mini episodes called Horror Highlights, where people email me with movies that could fit into my theme of the month, but I'm not covering. This is a way to categorize horror movies and maybe find something new. You can email me your movie suggestions at screamqueenpodcaster@gmail.com. That's podcast with the ER at the end. This is a weekly podcast with new episodes out every Thursday. All the research, writing, and audio is done by yours truly. I am going to get better. My last episode had all kinds of horrible errors with the audio, and I still trying to figure out where I'm going wrong here, especially when I have a guest on. This is a one-woman show, and I'm doing my very best, you guys. I have a monthly horror event at Conduit in Orlando, Florida. This episode will come out the Thursday before my next event, which is taking place on Monday, January 20th. Doors open at 7 p.m. I will have decorations, drinks, trivia, movies, and prizes. My event is based on my theme of the month and will be on movies I've covered on this podcast. More specifically, Wishmaster, Hellraiser, and Reanimator. If you haven't already listened to those episodes, do so you can get a leg up on the competition. Please rate, review, and subscribe. Sharing is caring, and I will only know you care about what I'm doing if you do these 3 things. Ooh, it's the power of 3. 3s, just like in Pan's Labyrinth. Del Toro had his 3 things. Here are my 3 things you can do for me to make my wish come true. Rate, review, and subscribe. So please do so, and do it often. If you didn't like what you heard, there's no such thing as bad press. So try your best to piss me off or whatever. If you found any of this offensive, chances are I wanted to offend you. Be careful what you wish for. Until next time, goodbye.